So we come from Sinai, this otherworldly supernatural experience, standing at that mountain and having God speak to us, and where we can palpably hear God. And we spoke last week about the idea of seeing what's usually heard. It was a very, very uplifting and supernatural experience. And then this week we get into seemingly much more of the mundane, just life. What happens if my dog bites your cat? Now, I'm going to share, and we're going to go back and forth with the sharing and the speaking just to see if that works better for everybody. The Talmud, and I'm going to just read the first few here, and then we can speak again. The Talmud tells us that there are basically two types of laws. One of them is called mishpatim, and that's in the Hebrew there. We're translating that as ordinances. And the other one is called chukim, which is statutes. Now, the Talmud tells us like this. Ordinance refers to ordinances, mishpatim, refers to mitzvahs which logic would dictate even if they wouldn't have been written in the Torah, such as adultery, murder, robbery. As human beings, with something about just a natural moral code and a recognition of what we need to have a stable society, we know that lawlessness is not going to work. So we're not for Torah, and the Talmud says this, we're not for Torah. These are things reasonable people, moral people would have come up with. We can't have people invading other people's marriages. We can't obviously murder, robbery. There has to be basic morals. And therefore those are things which make sense. They're mitzvahs, but they make sense. Statutes, chukim, refers to matters which are without a humanly appreciable reason, and thus matters which Satan challenges, such as eating pork and wearing shabbos. So I'm going to stop this for a second. They use the language, this is something that the Satan challenges. That's a Talmudic language for something where our weaker side is to say, hey, well, what does this mean? Why would I do this? Doesn't make any sense to me. And we have mitzvahs like that. We say, okay, but why? What's wrong with mixing wool and linen? What did a pig do? Why can't you have pork? What's the deal with mixing meat and milk? And we have a lot of mitzvahs like that, which don't have a humanly appreciable reason. Those are what we call chukim. We call statutes. There are two different types of mitzvahs clearly in the Torah. Those that are humanly appreciable, and those that we're going to call super rational. That is a Talmudic dictum, which clearly, as we study Torah, we'll see that that's the case. Now, this week's Torah portion, in number 2, it starts off, as I said, this is a smattering of laws, and coming out of the gate of Sinai, that supernatural experience, we're told these are the ordinances, mishpatim, that you shall set before them. The term mishpatim means rational mitzvahs. That's a name, a moniker, an appellation for rational mitzvahs. So the Torah introduces them as rational mitzvahs. This is going to be a Torah portion. We came out of Sinai, very supernatural. For whatever reason, the Torah now wants us to get into reasonable, rational mitzvahs that you and I could have come up with ourselves. That's what it seems to be saying. Now, even when it comes to this, if you look over here, it says, and, I don't know if you can see me highlighting it, but, and these are the ordinances, because that's the way the Torah says it. The vav, those who are familiar with the Hebrew, a vav, a vit in the beginning of a word means and. And these are the ordinances. I think we all learned in school, it's not good form to start off a sentence with and. But the idea of the and means it's connecting it to Sinai. Last week's Torah portion. And Rashi on the spot tells us, just as the previously stated 10 commandments are from Sinai, these two are from Sinai. So the Rashi is saying there, and the Torah is saying there, by telling us this is something which is going to be, we're going to now delve into rational mitzvahs, rationally appreciable, humanly appreciable mitzvahs that you and I could have sat around and figured, say, this is what we need for society. But the Torah itself sticks in that connecting and that where we say consciously or subconsciously to ourselves, this is connected, this is bound to last week's Torah portion. So last week's Torah portion is God talking to us and saying, this is, I'm with you. This is all about meaning in life. Moses is the guy. This is about a divine program for life. The idea is that this, as Rashi says, we should know that even though you and I could say, okay, so we have to be honest in business. We're talking about a certain situation. Yeah, I'm going to say, yeah, that's Jewish law. You'll say, who needs Jewish law? It makes sense. The Torah and Rashi is laying out that it's critical for us to know that even our rational mitzvahs have a divine imprimatur, that they are divinely given, that there is a divine component. It's not that we have the ritual mitzvahs, the spiritual mitzvahs, then we got the human ones. They're all Torah. And therefore, they're all given by God. The distinction is that some of them are given by God and we have no humanly appreciable component to it. And some of them are given by God and they're humanly appreciable. But as Rashi says, just like last week's Torah portions are from Sinai, this week's mitzvahs are from Sinai, this week's mitzvahs are from Sinai. Let's just bring it back up. Okay. And that was in 3. So number 4, the Rebbe, there's a quote from the Rebbe, and it says, the Torah's rational ordinances were given by God at Mount Sinai with the same thunderous presentation as the super-rational mitzvahs. So our fulfillment needs to reflect its religious imperative, not only its logical imperative. It's possible for an observant person, a God conscious person says, I want to have a relationship with God. It's really important to me, and therefore I'm going to put up a mezuzah. We're going to light Shabbos candles. I'll put on tefillin. I'll keep kosher. When we sit and we're looking at now business and how we're going to charge a client, one might say, well, that's okay. I can cut corners here. It'll be to my benefit. I have kids in college, and we can rationalize. And that guy, that customer. A few months ago, I think they cut corners with me, so I'm just taking back what's really mine. The human mind is a genius at rationalizing. What the Rebbe is saying there, and what the Torah is telling us, is that we should see no less divine import to the rational mitzvahs, and which is very critical. It's not the idea of if we have the basis, the foundation of us keeping mitzvahs is our rationale. It's I don't steal from my customers because I think it's wrong, or I don't hurt my neighbor because I think it's wrong. As soon as I think it's okay, the picture changes, because my rationale and the personal moral feelings, they are the arbiter. They are the litmus test of how I feel. For me to say, no, this is God. This is a mitzvah, and the mitzvah says I shouldn't take someone else's money if it doesn't belong to me. Now I say, well, but here I have a chance and I have an inclination as a person who cares about my relationship with God. That's not enough that I came up with a rationale. I got to see what Jewish law says about it. I've got to go and call a rabbi. I got to see what God says about it, because this is not my mitzvah. A mitzvah means a commandment. It means it implies a commander, and if God is giving us that mitzvah, then only God can give us the out to say, here it's okay to do whatever the instinct may be. Bring this back up. So as we go through the Torah portion we read yesterday, it actually becomes apparent that it's not just about rational mitzvahs. If the Torah had an editorial board, you'd wonder, because we had the Torah portion about Sinai. That's supernatural, God speaking, God giving mitzvahs. And now we say these are the rational ordinances. That's the opening line of the Torah portion. And a lot of them are rational ordinances. As I said, there's liability law, whatever it may be, all the things that are civil and humanly appreciable mitzvahs. But as we go on, there are a few that are not. In other words, an example, number 5, do not eat a young animal cooked in milk. The prohibition against eating meat and milk it's found 3 times in the Torah, and this is actually the first of the 3 times it's found in this week's Torah portion. That's not a rational mitzvah. There's no rationale given. Kosher doesn't have a rationale. So it's then in that, from that, now we say, 1 second, when the Torah says that this is, and introduces that this is going to be now, these are the statutes, these are the rational mitzvahs. It's not all rational mitzvahs. As we go towards the end of the Torah, of this Torah portion, it starts getting into some of the super rational. No, even more than that, once at the very end of the Torah portion that we read yesterday, it goes back to the Sinai story, which is also on a literary level, it's hard to understand. We read 8 days ago, 9 days ago, we read in the Torah portion about the Sinai experience. It gave us guidance, it gave us historical data, and then we moved on. But now, at the end of yesterday's Torah portion, we see that actually we didn't get all the data. It went back to the story of Sinai. So in other words, the rational mitzvahs are sandwiched within the Sinai experience, the supernatural Sinai experience. And so that itself is something where we see that the rational part is not just purely rational, it's intermingled with the super rational. And not only that, one of the things that it says is that and this is a very well-known quote of the Jewish experience at Sinai. I'll bring it back up in a minute. The Jewish experience at Sinai, the Jews came to Sinai, and they are 7 weeks out of slavery, and they are somewhat a ragtag band of slaves, the Hebrews. And God says, I got a Torah for you. I'm going to give it to you. And yet now you're not going to be able to do every single thing you want. And what the Jews said was, we will do, and then we'll understand. The Jews had a super rational surrender to God, saying, we trust you, we're in. And then God tells the details later, which is that's specifically a super rational, not a rational idea. If you look at the idea, it says he took the book of the covenant, meaning Moses. He took whatever, the Torah wasn't fully written at that point, but he took what was written up until that place in history, and he taught some of the mitzvahs that they had, and he read it within the hearing of the people, and they said, all that the Lord spoke, we will do and we will hear. And the language is here, it means we will understand. In other words, we will delve into it, we'll put a rationale into it later. So if that's the case, we can see from the Torah portion that even though it seems to be the overarching rubric is rational mitzvahs, it's not so rational. First of all, it's connected to last week. It says, and these are the ordinances. In other words, they are connected. As Rashi said, just like the last week's were from Sinai, these are from Sinai. There's a supernatural component, a divine component to our rational mitzvahs. And then the Torah goes on to super rational mitzvahs and the idea of we will do and then understand later. So the rationale part of it seems to be interwoven specifically by the Torah with the super rational. I want to try and frame that correctly. Now, there's another element which you'll read. The Jews, before they became Jews, as I said, at Sinai. So that's a mass conversion. For hundreds of years before that, they're Hebrews. What was the Torah they had? What did they do? What did Hebrews do? So what Hebrews did was they had bris, the mitzvah of circumcision. The Hebrews believed in one God, in monotheism, in an invisible God. And the Hebrews kept 7 laws of the children of Noah. So in Torah literature, in Torah thinking, there are 613 mitzvahs in the Torah, and there's 7 laws for all of humanity, which still apply. Now, those 7 laws they can be simplified into believing in God, not blaspheming God, no killings, no immoral, no adultery, being kind to animals, setting up courts of justice, rational mitzvahs, but 7. But according to some of the commentaries, one second, someone's asking. Okay, so I thought it was we will obey. It's Na'asa means, there's 2 questions here. That quote of we will do and we will hear, that's an accurate translation. We will do, say we will obey is fine because that's what it means. And hear is actually not good because hear means that it's just like the audible function. It means to understand. And I was going to change that, and I thought I did actually, because it clearly that's what it means. Now, one more question here. Were the Hebrews so accepting of the law and God that because they were so thankful to be out of Egypt slavery? I think partially, and I think we want to talk about that. God had street cred with them. God had just showed them for almost a year how the divine controls nature and cares about them and cares about their sorrows, their pain, and is entering the world, so to speak, are tinkering with reality, with nature, in order to promote justice. So yes, God had street cred with them, but I do want to pursue that a little bit more as we go on. But now to back to the text. This is from Nachmanides, who lived in the 13th century, one of our greats, medieval medieval times. And it says from Spain, in my opinion, the mitzvah among the 7 Noahide laws to establish courts includes theft, extortion, laws of ownership, bailies, damages, borrowing, lending. All of these, when he says, according to Nachmanides, is a very weighty opinion, 7 Noahide laws is 7 general laws. It's a lot more than just 7 laws. And one of them, the idea of establishing courts, it encompasses many, many civil laws like we had in this week's Torah portion. So if that's the case, that's something that the Jews had before Sinai. So if they had it already before Sinai, they had the 7 Noahide laws, and before Sinai, they knew not to about what happens when my dog bites your cat, and all of these things, the rational laws. Then it becomes a little more curious. Once we speak about Sinai, let's go to the supernatural laws. We had these already, so of course now we want to hear them again as Jews, but it was no news to us. So the Torah seems to be going out of its way to meld this supernatural covenant that we have with God, that we will obey and we will hear later, that God is giving us a Torah. This is from Sinai, together with our rational mitzvahs, and underscoring that there's a blend here between them. There's an intertwining of the rational and the super rational. So let's get to faith and rationale, because those two, many people would say that they're at odds with each other. The Torah is not going to see them as odds with each other. There are 2 different tools that work together in tandem towards our goal of having a full-bodied and healthy relationship with God, because that's ultimately our goal. Our goal is to truly connect with God in a full-bodied way. So let's look a little bit of what the Torah tells us about faith and the rationale. So first of all, we get in number 8, we find this refers back when Moses goes, actually, I'll stop this, then we'll talk and go back to it. When Moses goes to is in the narrative as we read it in the Torah, Moses is in Egypt. He's been raised in Pharaoh's house because he was rescued by Pharaoh from the river from Pharaoh's daughter. He sees his brethren suffering. He stands up for them. Pharaoh threatens to kill him. He runs away from Egypt. He goes to a place called Midian. There he becomes a shepherd, and one day he's out shepherding his flock, and he is on a mountain and he sees a burning bush. And there God speaks to him. That's his first revelation. At that point, God tells him to go to Egypt and confront Pharaoh and tell Pharaoh to let the Hebrews let his people leave and be liberated from slavery. At that point, one of the things Moses says is, they're not going to believe me. I know these Jews. They're not going. Why should they believe me? They've been suffering for hundreds of years. I'm going to come. First of all, I grew up in Pharaoh's house. I don't even, there's an undermining of street cred right there. But second of all, I'm coming along to tell them something. They're not going to believe me. And the Medrash tells us on that in number 8, it says, when Moshe said the people will not believe me, he spoke incorrectly. Oh, and I'm sorry, and this is I missed, and so this should say, and Hashem responded. And Hashem responded, God responded to Moses. He's wrong about the Jews. They are believers, the children of believers. God is testifying that we have there is something within us that believes. And that is an axiom of Torah thought. And I must say that in 30 years plus working with people, where I look at someone and I say, you're Jewish, I know that deep inside there's faith, but I can't really say that because it's kind of arrogant. Someone says, I don't believe. I say, no, you really do. I can't do that. And I don't do that. But my operating approach is really in my mind to saying, I know it's in there somewhere. I just have to try to dust it off. To me, it's sometimes in my work with families, if there's a major disruption between parent and child, adult parent and adult child, and I'm trying to help repair the relationship. The relationship between parent and child is beyond me. I didn't create it. I can't break it. But since I believe it's there, what I hopefully can do is take away static obstructions, that whatever is getting in the way of each of them feeling the natural love they have for each other. I can get rid of the schmutz, possibly. But the relationship between parent and child, that's beyond me. That's a fundamental. And therefore, the idea is that there is a natural, as God told Moses, sure, the Jews were unlettered. They had hundreds of years they were not able to study. They were not living, they were steeped in idolatry. And Moses said, understandably, these people are not going to believe me. Why would they believe me? And God says, this is your operating axiom. They are believers, the children of believers. There is faith there. So faith, our natural inclination to connect with God and to believe that there is a God, and hopefully a God who cares about us, that's deep within our psyche. Something that we don't create, something that we really can't destroy. We can ignore, we can overlay it, but it's in there. Now, at the same time, the Torah tells us, you should know today and take to your hearts that God is our Lord in the heavens above and on the earth below. The language is know. that we should use our rationale, we should use our intellect, we should use our critical analysis to come to an understanding and a grasp of God, the oneness of God, God in the Lord, in the heavens above and the earth below. This is also, I didn't translate it, the oneness part, the monotheism part. We are supposed to use our minds. That is a Torah imperative. This is from Deuteronomy. Chronicles tells us, know the God of your father and serve God with a full heart. What does that mean? That I have, to my tradition, this is the God of my parents, the God of the Jews, and I have this faith, this sense of connection. But it's when I know it, when I embrace it intellectually, when I delve into it, when I wrestle with it, logically and analytically, that's when I can serve with a full heart. In other words, in order for me to kick in the full psyche, in order for me or you to embrace God in a full-bodied way, natural faith is not going to be enough. The Torah tells us, Scripture tells us in Deuteronomy and in Chronicles that we have to use our mental faculty to ask and study and grapple with the idea of God, because that's how it becomes connected with our full psyche. We're human beings. We have intellect, we have emotions. And the way for us to ignite full-bodied emotions about anything is to frame something analytically and to be able to come to terms with it on a rational and analytical end, not just with faith. And to this point, I'm going to bring up, this is from a great mystic of the 1500s, known as the Shalah, and he writes this. He says, the foundation of foundations is what the Torah calls know God, which encourages us to pursue logical demonstrations and proofs of our beliefs beyond our acceptance of the tradition we've received from our ancestors. So even though there's the idea of we have received from our ancestors, we have a natural faith in God, we are called to know God, to pursue logical demonstrations and proofs of our beliefs. Know the God of your father means deepen the faith received from prior generations so you can grasp it with your own intellectual analysis. Another typo. He goes further and says, this is hinted in the verse, this is my God, and I will make him a sanctuary, the God of my father, and I'll exalt him. I want to show you this. This is in Hebrew, okay? I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Hebrew. This is a verse we say every day in our services. And it's part of what the Jews sang when they crossed the sea. When the Jews came out of Egypt and Pharaoh was chasing them, regretted letting them go. God split the sea and they crossed over. And on the other side, there is the song that they sang, and we say it every day in our prayers every single day of the year. Now, what this means is, this means this is my God, and I will make him a dwelling. I'll make God, in other words, a dwelling in this world. The God of my father, and I will exalt him. So this is what the Shalah is pointing to that verse. And he says like this. He says, this is my God, and I'll make him a sanctuary. The God of my father, I will exalt him. V'anvehu, this word, he says, is a contraction of two words. Ani v'hu, I and he. And the anvehu there means I, in other words, this is my God and I will be bound up with him. We are going to be one word, we'll be one connection, one person, one unit. Ani v'hu, I and he. Those are Hebrew words. Ani v'hu, that means I and he. God and I are one. And that is the word anvehu, which means I will make him a sanctuary, but it means it's hinting at to be one. When he's my God, whom I can appreciate with my own logic and understanding, then he and I are bound together. For the understanding grasps my heart. However, when my faith is solely because this is the God of my father and I exalt him in the depths of my heart, I'm still distant. I just want to look at the word one more time and then I want to explain what he said. This is the word anvehu, which means I will make him a sanctuary. And if you see, this is the word ani and hu. I and he. So you can see the letters are similar. So what is the Shalah telling us? The Shalah is writing to us, is telling us that if it's my God, in other words, I have reached an appreciation of God in my own mind, my own struggle, my own grappling, my own internal work. And I have come to a sense of connection, of acceptance of God, and an embrace of God. Then it's God and I. Then we're one. If it's, as the verse goes further, Elokei Avi, if it's only the God of my parents, then God's exalted. Exalted is great, but it's distant. To live a Jewish life, looking at God and say, this is what my parents believe, this is what I do. Okay, if it gets you to do the right thing, it's a nice thing. But that's not full-bodied. In order to be one with God, we need to find God, not just because that's what we're relying on our parents. It's because this is something that it's my God. I'm discovering. And yes, the launching point is that this is a God that the Jews have believed in for 3,300 years. And that's my point of departure. That's very important. But I'm going to discover God for myself. I'm not just going to rely on my parents or a rabbi or whatever it is. Okay, so now the question that the Rebbe once asked is, why, if the verse is, this is my God and I'll make him a sanctuary, the God of my father and I'll exalt him. Well, in the way we put it, faith comes first and personal analysis comes later, right? Because we're believers are the children of believers. We have a natural instinct and hopefully we're raised with a sense of God. That's our point of departure. And then we go through our own mental and academic struggle, and we find God on our own. So the chronology is backwards. It should say, this is the God of my parents, exalted, and then when it's my God, then it's then we're one together. We're together. Why does the verse tell us and put the personally achieved connection first, and then move on to faith when faith comes first? So this is where I wanted to go with you today, and the Rebbe's insight into what the Torah portions as their structure are telling us and what that specific verse is telling us. And as a preface, we had last week, we quoted this medrash, and I think I said last week it's going to come up a bunch. I didn't realize it would come up this week. There's an analogy of an emperor who decrees that Romans can't descend to Syria and Syrians can't descend to Rome. So there's an emperor who controls both Syria and Rome. So likewise, when God created the world, God decreed the heavens are God's and the earth God gave to humanity. That's the way the world was structured. The spiritual and physical, the twain shall never meet. At Mount Sinai, God nullified this decree. At Mount Sinai, God, by giving us the Torah, God said, not right now, it's no longer going to be that the physical is the physical and the spiritual is the spiritual. And you can pursue each track as you wish. But what he said is that now there's going to be the ability within the physical world to find holiness. And there's a symbiosis now, a melding of the two. And we discussed the last week from a certain angle, but I want to take a different angle on it now. Mount Sinai nullified this decree. The lower realm shall ascend to the higher, meaning that humanity can become more godly. The higher shall descend to the lower. And the higher means the divine is brought into our world. And then God says, I will be the first. I'm going to start this new pattern, and I am going to go. I apologize. By revealing myself on Mount Sinai, as it is written, and Hashem descended upon Mount Sinai. Now, what we have there is that is two different parties, the spiritual and the physical, or the godly and the human, and they're meeting. Meeting, what does meeting mean? If it's the idea that God reveals himself in the world and God overwhelms the world, which he did, then that's not two people, that's one party totally overwhelming the other party. That's not a marriage. And this is framed as a marriage. That's not a marriage. It's one party totally driving the bus and totally overwhelming the other party. And that's what it says. It says when God revealed at Mount Sinai, birds didn't chirp, cows didn't grunt, the world was silent. So in that sense, God overwhelmed the world. At the same time, that's true. But what happened, what's critical, is that the Jews were given space for them to find God. And even if you look at the Medrash, I said, it says here, what does it say first? The lower realm shall ascend to the higher, and the higher shall ascend to the lower. The first one that's given, I guess, some primacy is that the human is able to become more godly. And then it says the godly will come. And even though what actually happened was that God started it, that the divinity came to the human world. So chronologically, that's what happened. But the language of the Medrash is to give precedence to the idea that the human is not short-circuited, is not overwhelmed. But they have the wherewithal and the space to find God on their own. Remember, years ago, I was at a class in someone's house in Greenbrook, and a couple came, and they see someone like me, so the back is up that I'm, a fundamentalist, whatever they're thinking. And then after a while, they eased up. They usually do. And we had a nice conversation. So even though we started off the conversation, this couple are saying that, but we don't believe, and we don't have to believe, and no one can tell us we have to believe, and we're educated professionals, and we want to use our own minds and all of that. And I wasn't saying otherwise, but they had to put those cards out. Towards the end of the class, the husband says to me, God, something. If God would just show me a miracle, it would make life a lot easier. So I said, what? Do you remember what you said about 45 minutes ago? So now you want to use your mind and your analysis. That's what you wanted 45 minutes ago. Now you're saying you want God to break the laws of nature, grab you by the neck, put you against the wall and say, hi, I'm here. He's going to totally take away all your free choice. The point is for you to search and find God. So that idea is critical. The idea of God coming to Mount Sinai set the stage, was a very important, empowering gift to us so that we could go forward with a sense of confidence in our collective memory that we got a Torah and God cares about us and God gave it, it is real and the Torah is real. But then we got to break out of that and use our own minds. And to quote the Rebbe, and this is actually 16, I'm editing as I speak, one's internal striving doesn't create faith. In other words, you and I sitting and studying about the wonders of godliness, divinity, that doesn't create faith. We all have it naturally within our souls as a gift from God. And for this very reason, since we have a natural faith, faith itself doesn't create a true unity with God, as that Rabbi the Shalom had said. The true unity doesn't come just from God's gift of faith. It's specifically when we work within our human minds and psyches to appreciate God that we create the oneness of I and He. At the same time, faith serves as our foundation of proper intellectual exploration. Intellect left on its own can be misdirected by self-interest and should be predicated on faith. Faith gives me barriers. Not barriers and not as obstacles, but guidelines. And my faith, it helps me to guide my intellectual exploration to know where I'm going off the rails and to rethink and say, okay, maybe that's not correct because it doesn't align with the faith of our ancestors, and I have to rethink that. But coming out of that faith, in order for me to find that intimacy with God, if we go with what that Rabbi, the Shalom, said, and as the Rebbe is saying here, and as that Medrash is saying, is we have to use our own brain to study and to analyze. That's one of the things we do in Chabad thought. It's about trying to understand as much as we can about our own souls, about God and our place in the world. We're not doing that only as an academic analysis, it's because it's about life. It's about a feeling of full-bodied relationship with God. Now we want to take it one step further. We spoke about initial faith and then intellectual analysis. But first of all, we had a question of we still haven't resolved the sequencing of the sequencing of those the verse from the Jews left the sea. It says, "This is my God, and I will be one with Him. It's my God when I own it, and the God of my parents and exalted." It should be the God of my parents comes first, and then I become one with God when I own it, when I've studied. Another thing is we haven't really resolved this meshing of Sinai and the faith that comes with Sinai, rational ordinances back to Sinai. So I want to make a quick analysis of the nature of these two different types of mitzvahs, the super rational and the rational. So the previous Rebbe used to say that we wish for ourselves to fulfill mishpatim with the same sense of surrender as they fulfill chukim, as we fulfill chukim, and chukim with the same sense of zest they feel when fulfilling mishpatim. In one of the things that with a rational mitzvah is that we can be full-bodied. It makes sense to us. It's not just, oh, well, I don't know. Why we don't eat milk? Because this is what my grandparents did. This is what God told us. I have no idea. No, it's a rational mitzvah. You can explain it. Explain it to yourself, explain it to your friends, explain it to your family. And there's a certain enthusiasm that comes with it. There's a full-bodied part of it. There's an advantage to super-rational mitzvahs in the sense that it's a purely religious experience. Why, when a person doesn't eat pork, I mean, there could be a bunch of different motives, but ultimately there's no reasoning behind it. Your parents did, okay, so what? But why didn't your parents do it? This is something, it's a mitzvah that Jews do. There's a certain surrender because it's not rational. That's beautiful. That's a religious experience. When it's a rational mitzvah, the surrender part is a little more of a challenge because we don't need surrender. I understand it. If I see a poor person and I have an extra buck and the person talks at my heartstrings, I give him a buck. That's a mitzvah. But instinctively, it's because I felt it. Anytime there's a rational mitzvah, our engine is instinctively going to be us. We like certain things. Certain things make sense to us, and we do them. When I do something that I can't explain just because God said so, that's surrender. So what the previous Rebbe said is that we would hope, and I'll go back to it in a second, is that we would hope to have the sense of surrender that comes with chukim, with statutes, even when we do rational mitzvahs. And that we have the enthusiasm that comes with rational mitzvahs, even when we do super rational mitzvahs. Let me bring this up. We for ourselves to fulfill mishpatim with the same sense of surrender as we fulfill chukim, and chukim with the same sense of zest that we feel when fulfilling mishpatim. Okay, so there is it's not a clear, there's obviously a very clear difference between them. Some are rational mitzvahs, some are super rational mitzvahs. But we want to bring the advantage of each into the other. Now, they have different energies. One of the things that he says in the Medrash is a person should not say, I don't desire pork or to wear a mixture of wool and linen. Rather, I do desire, but what can I do when my God has instructed me? The Medrash says, don't deprive yourself of a religious experience. If I'm hungry tomorrow, I haven't eaten, and I'm out somewhere in Schooley's Mountain, and I'm in a 7-Eleven, and I can't find anything substantive kosher to eat, which is, of course, you can today in a 7-Eleven, but just a scenario. And something looks really, really tempting to me, but it's not kosher. So I might say to myself, because I know that intellectual framing is a very important guide to how we emote, how we feel. So I might say to myself, you know something? I know people who have had bacon and they said it doesn't taste that good. Just because I'm trying to calm my instinct and my desire, my appetite. The Medrash says don't do that. Don't say, I wouldn't want that. Say, Joe, actually it tastes good. But what can I do when God has told me not to eat it? In other words, he's saying, don't use your mind to rationalize all the mitzvahs and say, pork, it tastes, I don't like broccoli, I don't like pork. Maybe it tastes good. I do desire it. What can I do when God has instructed me? Now, Maimonides goes and to point out to us that only applies to the super rational mitzvahs. The evils which are instinctively recognized as such, murder, theft, coercion, should not be at all desired by the lefty soul. Maimonides is saying, don't tell, the Medrash isn't saying, oh, I'm not going to kill that guy. I really would want to kill the guy, but what can I do? God told me not to murder. That's crazy. A healthy person doesn't want to murder anybody. A healthy person doesn't want to steal anything. So we should not be putting ourselves in that position saying, I would like to harm that person, but what can I do? God told me not to. No, that means we're trying to corrupt our personalities. We should instinctively not want to do those things. Super rational mitzvahs, there's no other reason but God. There's nothing inherently evil about pork except that God said so. Should not be at all desired by the lofty soul. Our rabbis praise the soul who conquered the desire to follow behavior which would not appear wrong to humanity, but for this Torah's instruction, which is evidenced by the fact that our rabbis in Torah's Kohanim, which is the measures before, use super rational mitzvahs as their examples. And the third Lubavitch Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Lubavitch, he amplifies this. He says, even the perfectly righteous who totally reject anything that would create distance with God should not say, I don't desire these behaviors which you avoid only because of the Torah's guidance, as Maimonides has written. Because the supernatural mitzvahs have a distinct lofty energy, and by acknowledging that I do desire, and then accepting God's instruction to the system, one triggers a special level of divine flow. So the idea of looking at super rational mitzvahs and saying, in my nature, my psyche would like to do it, but I will not do it because I'm surrendering to God. Holding on to that super rational, in other words, is as important as rationale is, as important as analytics are, as we just spoke about it. There is a very important element of the super rational that we need to hold on to. And as the Rebbe says, while there's a distinct advantage to serving God with our logic, which helps to affect oneness between the person and the divine, human intellect is ultimately limited. And the goal of unifying higher and lower also applies to concepts beyond the person's intellectual grasp. The Rebbe is saying, we have 3 steps here. We spoke about 2 steps. Faith, which is super rational, so the God of my parents, and then there's analysis. He says, but there's something else beyond it. Even after you analyze, there's stuff you don't understand. Achieving oneness by way of our logic, the goal of unifying higher and lower also applies to concepts beyond the person's intellectual grasp. None of us, as smart as we are, as accomplished as we are, we're going to understand everything, especially within the godly. And so there are always going to remain faith factors, even when we're really plugging away intellectually. And through achieving oneness by way of our logic, we are primed to accept super rational dimensions of the divine in a full-bodied way. So I want to draw this, we're getting close. What the Rebbe is saying is that the first level of faith, I grew up, my parents, that was an instinctive thing. Not everybody has that. But again, we believe it's instinctive within the soul. That's not a rational thing. And that's a gift of God's. Gift of my parents, it's a gift of God's. That doesn't even make it into the verse. That's step 1. It's not my accomplishment. What I can accomplish is to feel close to God through my own striving and understanding and wrestling and contemplating and meditating and plugging away, and maybe not fully understanding, then in a week or 2 or a month, maybe it starts to gel. Once I'm doing that, then my approach to things I don't understand is much, much healthier and much, much more internalized. It's similar to like Susan had asked before, actually, so I guess I missed some questions here. So as I had asked before about were the Jews primed to accept Torah because God had taken them out, because they'd had this experience. Yeah. Think about it, let's say, in a marriage. I meet someone. You like them. You have no reason to like them. You're in a bar, wherever you are. This is some chemistry. You don't know who they are. You don't know who their parents are. You don't know if they're an ex-murderer. It feels good. It feels right. Doesn't mean it is right. Once you start asking questions, once you start analyzing compatibility, once you start analyzing shared values, once you start analyzing how you interact with each other, and it makes sense, then you don't rationally fall in love. Reason, intellect, brings you up to the threshold where it's safe to fall in love, because it makes sense. And once you fall in love, then there are things you don't understand about the person. But it's okay. It's okay because you brought yourself to a place. It wasn't that initial place of, I don't know, I don't even know her last name. She was really nice. That's not rational. I mean, it's a start, but it's not rational. But once there has been the rational exploration, then to open ourselves up to faith after that, it's a much healthier faith. It's a faith that has that can be full-bodied because it came about in a full-bodied way. And the last quote that I put in here is from the Psalms. Chassidic thought tells us that there's a verse. It says, "Dwell on earth and nourish faith." That's the language of the Psalm. Through living lives, doing mitzvahs, analyzing, arguing, thinking, wrestling, struggling, we can nourish our own faith. And what we're doing is, it's not a simple faith. God and my parents. It's a faith that's substantive. So that verse, we say, "This is my God, and I will be connected with him." That's with intellect and rational analysis. And then it progresses even more, even higher. "This is the God of my parents, and I will exalt him." It's a greater level. It's the super rational connection, a safe super rational connection. You know why? Because you went through the rational, you walked the rational path. And the Torah is presenting it that way. There's God acts on us at Sinai. Spiritual fireworks. Birds aren't chirping, cows aren't grunting, not a sound. We're overwhelmed. Then we get into the rational mitzvahs, and then the Torah says, moving on from the rational, go to the super rational. Because the super rational there is safe. It's falling in love with God. Now there's one more question here. So from early on, Jews were challenged to use their intellect and therefore continue with education in all facets of life. Yes, I would say that that's correct. So I don't know if there are any questions. If not, God willing, we'll see you next week.
Actually, Rabbi, I have a question. Will we ever find out the reason for a super rational mitzvah?
You want to know when we will find out the reason for super rational mitzvahs?
Yeah, can be. Will it happen before Mashiach comes?
So that's a great question, Gennady. Maimonides and Rashi seem to have a debate about this. Maimonides writes that the reasons for the mitzvahs are beyond the human ken, and that's why we will be able to appreciate them in time of Mashiach. Rashi says there are no reasons. Now, it doesn't mean it's irrational. It means that it's divine will, and it depends what you call a reason. There's the Hebrew word for a reason is a tam, means a taste. So say that it's like you have, if my wife is pregnant and she wants pickles and ice cream, she wants it. What's the reason? Because she wants it. Now, so it's understanding. Rashi's not saying that they're irrational mitzvahs, but he's saying it's beyond reason. It's about God giving us opportunities to connect with him. And when Mashiach comes, we'll be able to appreciate the depth of the soul of the mitzvahs, not necessarily a calculation, an equation that brings us to the mitzvah, but we'll be able to appreciate the soul of the mitzvah.
So prior to Mashiach coming, we don't have a chance to understand it.
So Maimonides writes also, and I didn't bring this. He writes that there are some mitzvahs without reason, and we can speculate and we can draw lessons, but it's kind of arrogant for us to decide what God's reason was. How will we know? But if for us to debate and try to extract lessons and guidance from mitzvahs and possible benefits from mitzvahs, that's fine. But God's reason, unless God gave us a reason, how am I going to know?
Mendy question. Are you having your course start on Tuesday night at 7:30?
Yes, JLI. Thank you.
In the synagogue also?
Good question.
I've heard both Zoom and in person.
One second. I think it's both. 1 second. Yes, it's both.
Thank you.
I like the fact that you have to check, which means you're delegating to other
it tells
authorities,
you a little bit, doesn't it? Sorry.
certain functions.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
was
things
Mendel and Chaya.
that I don't know what goes on.
Right. It doesn't say it clearly.
You
but
hit-
I'm pretty sure. I'll let you know.
Yeah,
All right.
you hit the brass ring with Mendel.
Say it again.
I said you hit the brass ring with Mendel for sure.
For sure.
Just
For sure. Thank God.
on that subject. Yeah.
All right.
Have a good week, Rabbi.
Have a great week. Yes.
Thank you.
Запись.
Thank you.
Done.